The 60mm T2.9 1.33 squeeze lens is the very first anamorphic offering from the new manufacturer Greatjoy. Greatjoy is a new startup looking to offer low-end anamorphic lenses for mirrorless cameras. The lens is designed for full frame, which is commendable given that it was backed on Kickstarter for $789 for the lens alone. The retail price will be $999. I backed both this lens and the adapter, which will provide an additional 1.35 squeeze and will turn this 1.33 lens into a 1.8 squeeze lens. I backed both of these as backer number 42 for a total of $1,188. At this time, the adapter is still not shipped, so keep an eye out in the future for a review of that. The body of the lens is small for a full-frame anamorphic and is much more comparable to the Siryu offerings than the Vaisons. Upon holding it, the first thing you are going to notice is the weight. The RF mount comes in at 790 grams thanks to its all-metal body design. The lens sports a screw hole, which I imagine will be essential for using the adapter. I say this because the lens itself is dense and heavy, but it's not so heavy that I feel the need to put lens support on it. However, putting on additional weight, especially that of an adapter that's going to sit right at the front of the lens, you definitely want to have something underneath that. The construction of the lens is nice, with smooth focusing and aperture rings, as well as clear markings on both. The lens does not communicate with the camera, so data will not be transferred electronically. The front filter is 67mm. That's nice to use for any screw-ons of that size. You can also use step-up rings, and the adapter itself, when it comes, that has a 77mm front screw. That's a nice standard size. You'll be able to probably use a lot of stuff that you already have on hand. There's no protruding elements. You can use matte boxes and whatever else you want. With all this considered, the actual design of the body of the lens, it hits a lot of those criteria that I am looking for. Alright, the optics of this lens are next. And right away, the sharpness from corner to corner throughout the entire aperture range has me very pleased. Colors are rendered well, and there's a fair amount of contrast that I particularly do enjoy. The image from the lens looks modern, so it will not quite give you the vintage lens look or that of a lot of more organic anamorphics, such as the $8,000 plus Vaisons. What did surprise me the most about the optics of this lens is that there's very controlled focus breathing. There's a little bit, it does exist. It's very minor though, and I was very impressed. Given the cost, the breathing is minimal, especially compared to the contact Zeiss set that I use a lot for video, where the focus breathing on those lenses is really one of my biggest gripes with that set. The Greatjoy is going to lose some of the waterfalling anamorphic bokeh as you start to stop down. Most of those elements are going to be disappearing by f8, and if you do stop down to f11, you're going to have absolutely none of that character. Characteristic bokeh is ovular and has a nice solid shape to it, nothing too distinct going on there. It's adequately represented at T2.8, but if you get down to T8, you're going to have basically circular bokeh. From this, you're really probably starting to see some of the downsides of the Greatjoy. It has great build quality. The optics are sharp. But that characteristic anamorphic quality is going to start to dissipate once you stop the lens down. Limiting your shooting to T5.6 is absolutely a downside to this lens, and you could essentially get the same effect for just slapping black bars on your footage like it's 2015. So one more point about the ovular bokeh. In the center, it has a really nice shape. However, once that element moves to either side of the frame, it starts to create a crescent shape. Now, I'm interested to see how this effect is impacted by adding the adapter onto the end, as that's going to stretch the image further, but I'm interested to see what's going to happen at the edges with the bokeh. Finally, there's every YouTube filmmaker's favorite aspect of anamorphic: flares! As I've said in previous videos, I'm not a big fan of the exaggerated and super blue-tinted Siryu type of flares. The more expensive Vaisons, for example, those tend to catch my eye more because they look more organic, they have nice rainbowing elements coming out of light sources, and they will either tint blue or amber depending on what lens you're actually using in their set. The Greatjoy produces some modest bursts and rainbowing around light elements. It's not that defined though, and I wish it was more present in the image. The streaking flares, in my opinion, look pretty good. They definitely tint blue, but they aren't so exaggerated and they don't dominate the shot in such a way that I feel like the Siryus did. Again, they're not the most organic streaks you're ever going to get. Something like the Avioscope, I think, actually has better looking flares. But again, you're talking about price point, just having a single lens as opposed to throwing an adapter on the end of it. So, biggest downside with the flares. I did find with blue tinted LEDs that they start to look more like a streak filter rather than an actual organic lens produced flare. I'm going to experiment with this a lot more once the adapter comes. I want to really see how the anamorphic quality of the lens is going to be amplified or mitigated by having that on board. Overall, the flares are more subdued than a lot of others in this price point, and they have a better look to them in my opinion. Overall, the Greatjoy 60mm is a great entry to the budget anamorphic market for mirrorless cameras, and I'm really excited to see what the company is going to do from here. The lens has some caveats. While you get a lot of pretty nice character while the lens is wide open and stopped down once or twice, once you get that down to f8 or beyond, it just looks like a standard lens with black bars over it. Now, that character is most of why you're going to get an anamorphic lens in the first place, isn't it? These compromises might be a deal breaker for you, so absolutely keep those in mind and see if you could rent one of these ahead of time. There are compromises with each budget brand's offerings of anamorphic lenses, but with more of these going on the market, more competition is just going to make for better lenses when we get a Mark II version of the series, of the Greatjoys, and such. Greatjoy came out swinging with their first lens, and I'm very excited to see where they go from here. Finn! You are a great joy.